This franchise is arguably one of, if not the best action game series out there. If you disagree with me, then you at least can't argue about how influential it was. We wouldn't have some of the absolute greats like Metal Gear Rising, Hi-Fi Rush, and even Bayonetta without Devil May Cry's wacky goofy antics. Bayonetta was made by the same fella who made DMC, but without it he probably wouldn't have made it without knowing what he learned from Devil May Cry. Either way, this series is awesome, and it's the pinnacle of stylish combat. In fact, I would argue that the white-haired twink Dante invented style himself. Now, Devil May Cry wouldn't have any of this shit without an in-depth combat system, and even in the first game back in 2001, they knew this, putting combat before everything else. That shit had an in-depth combat system. You could pull off so much stuff if you mastered it, and this was all on an early era PS2 game. That console really was peak, wasn't it, now that I think of it? All of this in-depth combat shit was only with Dante. When we got to the third game, no, I'm not including you in this, get the fuck out of here, they introduced Dante's brother Virgil as a playable character in the special edition, with his own entirely new moveset and weapons, which was just as in-depth as Dante's. Then in the PS3 era, we got Nero, who again had all of that shit, plus a grabby hand, which allowed him to grapple enemies towards him. Oh, and we can't forget the time Capcom tried to reboot the series by making it more edgy and shitting on the original games.
Not in a million years.
And the fans who loved it, they also turned Dante into an asshole. Don't even get me fucking started on Virgil's fedora too. They had to patch that shit out. I mean, hey, despite this, I do actually quite like the DMC reboot. It's not a bad game by any means, and it probably would have done well if it didn't have the Devil May Cry title. A long ass time after the reboot though, we got Devil May Cry 5, and they just went all out with that one. But we'll get to that another time. Make sure to like and subscribe for a future video on Devil May Cry 5. Instead, I want to focus on the main free Devil May Cry games. But before we do that, let's talk about a bit of the series' history. Are you familiar with Resident Evil 4? Of course you are, nobody ever shuts up about it. Hell, even I don't shut up about it. I've mentioned the game in so many of my videos, albeit it's usually actually related to the subject of the video. This one is no different. Did you know that the original Devil May Cry was supposed to be a version of Resident Evil 4? Yeah, I mean, you already know that. Literally every single Devil May Cry video essay you watch, I guarantee you they will talk about this history. And I'm gonna do the exact same thing, because it is really interesting. The version of Resident Evil 4 that became Devil May Cry didn't star Leon S. Kennedy to begin with. Instead, it was a fella named, oh wait, no, his name was Tony Redgrave. He wore a red jacket and, well, I mean, just look at him. It's obvious he was an original version of Dante. See, Capcom didn't like this version of the game, as they thought it didn't fit with what Resident Evil was to begin with, being way too focused on action rather than horror and suspense, which is ironic because of how the series ended up turning out later. Hideki Kamiya, who was directing this version of Resident Evil 4, didn't want this version of the game to be scrapped and decided to take what they had already made for it and formed his own little team within Capcom to work on what they had, which was when Devil May Cry was born.
Time to go to work, guys. Let's rock, baby.
Devil May Cry came out on the 23rd of August 2001 to critical acclaim, and that was for a good ass reason. This game, oh man, this game goes hard. It's not my favorite in the series, don't get me wrong, but it's still insanely good, especially for its age. Well, only in the gameplay department at least. Devil May Cry begins with a mysterious blonde lady tracking down Dante in his office. He runs a paranormal investigation agency called Devil May Cry, I know, very subtle, where he hunts down and kills demons that have somehow gotten into the human world. Dante is actually half demon himself, which is what allows him to do all of the crazy shit he's able to pull off in gameplay. The reason why he isn't a horrific monster is because of the human half of him, which keeps him empathetic towards humans. And very attractive. Oh, it's also because demons killed his family, hence why he runs Devil May Cry. The blonde lady from before busts down the door on a motorbike. She then proceeds to attack Dante there and then, impaling him with his own sword, which will be a trend in this series. Dante comes out on top, and just as he's about to kill the mysterious blonde lady, she states her name. She's called Trish, and she's here seeking help from Dante to put a stop to the underworld. Before Dante can say anything, she takes her glasses off and shows her face, which shocks Dante, because she looks just like his mother, Eva, the human side of his heritage. Trish states how Mundus, the Dark Prince of Darkness, is being resurrected and planning to cross over into the human world again to cause chaos and general bad shit. She tells him that all of this is happening on an island in the middle of nowhere. Mundus is important because he was killed previously by Dante's father, Sparda, the demon side of his heritage. So Dante has a very important job to do. Just like that, you're thrown into the game. And this is where the Resident Evil DNA is instantly recognizable. Not only does it have fixed camera angles, but there's this thick, ominous atmosphere that hits you instantly. You aren't thrown into combat. Instead, you explore this eerie castle, all the while this spooky ass ambient music is playing. That is until you encounter your first enemy, which are these creepy puppet demons. And then the tone completely shifts. Your blood starts pumping as this intense track starts playing, hyping you up. And that's when Devil May Cry really shows its own identity. The game doesn't fuck around. Sure, you're playing as a half demon goblin man with dual pistols, but enemies can and will hit you hard as fuck, pushing you to think tactically with what moves to pull off in combat scenarios. You also get rewarded for mixing up your moves with the style meter. It starts to drain if you either hit or keep spamming the same move, pushing you to mix and match. This shit gets even more amplified later into the game when you acquire more weapons, like my personal favourite, the Flaming Gauntlets, Ifrit. I don't know how to say that. I love these things. The puppet enemies are a perfect introduction to the combat. They flinch pretty easily to your attacks, letting you experiment with different moves without getting interrupted from being hit. This is the only part where the game takes things easy on you though, because shit gets tough real fast, introducing you to new enemies at a rapid pace, like these panther things, which I hate to admit I got stuck on the first encounter with. Let's not forget about the boss fights, which are equally just as challenging. The first boss you have to face is a giant ass molten lava spider called Phantom, and he is tough. Tough to the point where I can imagine a lot of people quit the game by the time they got to him. Then there's this weird looking armored guy who Dante recognizes after he shows his face. I wonder if that'll come up again at some point. Ooh. Devil May Cry had quite a smaller budget, considering the fact it was supposed to be a scrapped version of Resident Evil 4. So there aren't that many boss fights. In fact, you fight the same ones up to 3 times to make up for it. It's a good thing they're all awesome to face, except for Nightmare. I never knew a puddle of tarry poo could be an infuriating boss. Like I said earlier, you gain more weapons for your time on the island, which makes the repeat fight against the bosses fresh because you have new tools in your arsenal to experiment with. You never know when you're going to be getting a new weapon too. In fact, the first sword you find impales Dante in the chest. Not everything is perfect though. Level design is where Devil May Cry falls flat on its face, and it's because of the Resident Evil DNA that still lingers. And it's especially noticeable with its level design. You'll be backtracking pretty frequently trying to find key items to solve puzzles and access different areas of the castle. All the while enemies are constantly respawning whenever you re-enter a new door and trigger a loading screen. Sure, I said I liked the combat and all, but refighting the same ghost fella with no scissor safety gets really tiring after the 80th time trying to find out where the fuck to go. This level design doesn't make much sense either, considering it's a chapter based game where you're given a new objective at the beginning of each one. There's also quite a few PS2 era janky gimmick sections that bring the game down overall, like these swimming bits, which thankfully never ever return in the future titles. And it's for a good reason. These sections are awful. None of this brings Devil May Cry down though, not by a long shot. The combat being so fun and in-depth carries it from start to end. That shit even holds up to this day. Despite its flaws, it was an amazing beginning, laying a solid groundwork for what was to come for the future of the series. Devil May Cry in the end has sold over 3 million copies, and was given an insane amount of accolades from critics and players alike. It's considered a classic, and it would be an understatement saying the people weren't excited for a sequel back then, which makes it even more tragic with what they actually got.
In an age of darkness, humanity's hope lived in a demon named Sparda.
This game doesn't deserve a cool intro. I'm not exaggerating when I say it's a pile of shit. It's a stain on the DMC franchise, even more than the reboot is considered. But we have to get through this one before I get to talk about the insane redemption of this series. Devil May Cry 2 was made in a lazy attempt of quickly leeching off of Devil May Cry fans while the first game was still popular. Hideki Kamiya, the original director for the first game, wasn't even informed until pretty late into the game's production that it was even being made. It was instead directed by some mystery man man whose identity we still don't know even to this day. He was probably hidden by Capcom on some shit after the disastrous launch. The game was eventually passed on to Hideki Itsuno. I don't know if I said his name right. In fact, he was passed the entire torch of the Devil May Cry series, but we'll talk about him later. DMC2 was released to a very sloppy reception, and that was for a very good reason. I don't know if you can tell by now, but I really don't like this game. You may have noticed from the intro montage I made at the start of the video that I didn't include any clips from Devil May Cry 2, because literally nothing of interest happens in it. Do you want to know what is good though? Sneak energy.
It's good for you.
They just recently released a new flavor called Yellow Snow. Who doesn't want to drink piss that energizes you? Click the link in the description below to check out Sneak for yourself. It's a powdered energy drink that I use almost all the time when I'm editing videos. Every purchase goes towards supporting the channel. Okay, I'm sorry for stalling, fellas. I really don't want to talk about this game. Devil May Cry 2 is stinky poo-poo caca, and I don't like it. They had such a good groundwork laid out from the first DMC, yet they did absolutely fucking nothing with it. They made it worse. How do you fuck up something that's already right there for you to use? The combat in DMC2 is really bad. It's insanely basic. Sure, there are still loads of different weapons you can get throughout the game, but they all have stupid basic ass free hit combos that aren't satisfying to use whatsoever. There's still a style meter, but you never feel good for getting to the S rank whatsoever. Then there's the guns. Now the guns in DMC are usually deliberately weak, allowing you to keep enemies in the air, giving you time to air combo them without killing them to get your style meter up. DMC2 didn't realize this because it made the guns stupidly powerful, which made the melee weapons almost obsolete. I don't know what's more fun than just standing around shooting enemies. The game even pushes you to just spam your ranged weapons because none of the enemies are fun to fight up close. Oh, and then there's the boss fights, which are somehow even worse. Sure, there are way more than the bosses in the original game, but it's definitely quantity over quality here. We have some absolute classic boss fights with shit like Infested Tank, which can't hit you if you just stand underneath it. Oh, and of course we can't forget Infested Chopper. I don't even need to say anything, just look at this. To give DMC2 some credit, the spectacle of a lot of the demon boss fights are really cool. Like the boss that literally comes out of the side of a skyscraper, which was used in a lot of the marketing back in the day. And I mean, this was for a good reason. It's such a cool ass introduction, yet it's all just brought down when you actually play the game for yourself and realize how much the gameplay fucks everything up. There's some other things I could go into that I hate, like Lucia, the other playable character, but the game doesn't have any cloud saves, so I lost all my save data when I got my new PC, and I don't want to play through all the way again. You're all amazing and all, and you know, thank you all so much for watching my videos, and I want to give you all the best content I can, but I really don't want to do this shit to myself for content, man. Even though I do hate DMC2, I am glad it exists. It did bring a lot of features to the series that became mainstays, like the Bloody Palace. It's this mode where you go down floors fighting more and more gauntlets of enemies with the occasional boss fight sprinkled in. Like I said, it became a mainstay because it was such a good idea. It's a shame that it was in Devil May Cry 2. Anyway, it's time to forget about this shit and move on to what is considered literal peak.
You've heard of it, haven't you? The legend of Sparta? I never believed it. I thought it was just a child's fairy tale. But I discovered that this so-called legend wasn't a myth at all. Sparta existed. How do I know? I met the sons of Sparta. Both of them.
Remember what we used to say? Jackpot.
Now this is how you redeem a series. Devil May Cry 3 is peak, and I'm not exaggerating here. It takes everything amazing about Devil May Cry 1 and amplifies it by a million. The combat is impeccable, it's literally perfect. It's amazing. See, Hideki Itsuna was so pissed that his name was put on such a shit game he didn't even make for the most part, that he basically told Capcom, let me make another one from the start, and you'll see how fucking powerful I am. I may be paraphrasing a bit, but it must have been pretty similar to what he actually said to Capcom. To begin with, the level design is much better than the originals. It's more linear with less backtracking and weird puzzles. I mean, they're still there and they still suck, but it's nowhere near as bad. Oh god, I can't forget the aesthetic either. The original DMC went for a gothic style and it was cool in that game, but it kinda didn't have its own identity, feeling like a Resident Evil game instead. DMC 3 takes the gothic aesthetic and makes it its bitch. The environments are amazing, especially when you get near the end. Then there's the story and characters. Oh boy, that's going to be talked about in just a bit, but I'll just say it's the exact same quality as the rest of Devil May Cry 3. Let's start by talking about the combat, as that's usually the most important part of any Devil May Cry. They somehow perfected it, like, I'm not even joking here. They change almost nothing in the future games for Dante, apart from some quality of life shit like style changing on the fly, rather than having to select one before the start of a mission. I say almost nothing, but this small change alone turns Dante from Demon Slayer to fucking Doomsday Machine. Holy shit. Oh, actually, yeah, that's something brand new. Dante's fighting styles. He has 4, plus 2 unlockable ones, and each one is completely distinct from each other. Adjusting moves map to one button on the controller, and this one button can make such a huge difference to the way you fight. The first style is Trickster, which is the dedicated dodge button. It sounds simple, and it's very good for someone new to the game, allowing them to escape sticky situations they find themselves in. But once you level it up and it becomes a teleport, it allows you to teleport towards enemies you knock back, letting you follow up on even more combos, increasing your style meter as you do. Then there's Swordmaster, which is my personal favourite, adding extra combos for all of your melee weapons, and that includes air combos. It's very similar to the Gunslinger style, except that one obviously focuses on the ranged weapons. Then there's the Royal Guard style, which is probably the least appealing one at first glance. I mean, it's just a block move. Oh wait, this is Devil May Cry 3, bitch. It's a motherfucking parry where you can create a huge powerful counterattack depending on how much you've parried. This is easily the most broken style if you know what you're doing. It's busted. When Dante uses it in his boss fight in 5, it is the scariest thing. This style system is amazing, expanding on the combat so much. That's not even including all of the new moves Dante can pull off. My only issue is you can only change styles at the beginning menu on missions. This is something that's fixed in future games where they allow Dante to switch between any style on the fly in between combos whenever. In fact, Capcom actually added this feature into the Nintendo Switch port exclusively. Why this isn't in every other version of the HD collection is baffling to me. All it takes is an update. Come on, guys. Thank God for mods, always improving and expanding upon existing titles. What would be of gaming without the care and talent of... It doesn't bring the combat down though. This shit is still amazing, especially with the brand new weapons you can acquire from boss fights. They're all completely unique and distinct from each other. Hell, there's literally a guitar weapon, and Dante doesn't even use it like a traditional weapon, swinging it around. He instead just plays it and kills his enemies with music, because this is Devil May fucking Cry. I can't deny some of the bosses do suck though, but it's only a few that I can easily list off, like Shadow Dante and that godforsaken chariot fight. This could just be down to a skill issue though. Yeah, it probably is. Devil May Cry 3 is a hard game, okay? Cut me some slack here. The plot of Devil May Cry 3 is another highlight too, which is a huge surprise considering the plot wasn't really a big deal up until this point. It begins similarly to the original game, with Dante sat in his office, except this time he's topless and eating pizza, living every man's dream. Instead of the door being busted down by a motorbike, there's instead a random guy with a weird mark on his face approaching him slowly. He tells Dante that he's been invited by his brother to come see him, and this invitation is given to him with an ambush. You gotta remember though, this is Dante, and he walks this off like it's fucking nothing and proceeds to beat the absolute shit out of every single one of them in one of the coolest cutscenes ever made. This is a PS2 game, by the way. I don't know how they pulled this off.
Actually!
After that, you're thrown into the first mission, and it sets the tone instantly, with Dante still being ambushed by all of the demons, except this time you're in control. You aren't exploring a creepy castle with an ambient track playing. No. You're blasting and slashing your way through with demons while intense music is playing in your ears. It's the shit Devil May Cry is known for. Once Dante leaves his office, a huge tower just randomly appears from the ground in the middle of the city. And at the top of that tower is Dante's brother Virgil, the best character in all of fiction. You may remember me saying that Dante embraces more of his human side. Well, Virgil is the complete opposite, wanting to harness his demonic side for nothing but power. That is all he cares about, which obviously makes the two brothers clash a lot.
Goofy, we're Mickey and Donald. You know, you're friends. Who needs friends when you've got power?
It's shown in how they act too. Dante is very brash and goofy, cracking sillies left and right, just having a good time using his powers to taunt his enemies, whilst Virgil is cold and calculating, focusing on nothing but perfection in how he fights. Their weapons embrace these character traits too. Dante's Sword Rebellion is this huge sword that you can just swing around recklessly without much care. There's even a cool skull on it. Then there's Virgil's weapon, the Katana Yamato, and if you know anything about katanas, they're only used with serious precision to be effective. Even their colour schemes show their clashing personalities, with Dante wearing a red jacket and Virgil in a blue one. Red is a hot, brash, rebellious colour, suiting Dante's personality, whilst Virgil's blue is... okay, I think I'm just looking into this a bit too much. The reality is their father Sparda's colour was purple, which is just a mix of red and blue, so it just isn't that deep. I don't know what I'm going on about.
No. He's got a point.
Virgil summoned the tower in an attempt to connect the human world to the demon world using the amulet given to them by their mother. Issue is, there's two amulets. Virgil has one and Dante has the other, and he isn't gonna let Virgil do this shit, climbing his way to the top of the tower to stop him, causing him to actually get impaled by Virgil with his own sword. But this activates his devil trigger, which I should have mentioned is this special ability you can activate once it's charged up enough, embracing your devil form, allowing you to speed up, do more damage, and regenerate health. You fight Virgil 2 more times throughout the game, and each one is just as amazing as the other. At one point he actually finishes off a boss before Yukanon steals the weapon he drops, using it against you in one of his fights. It's like brothers fighting over a toy, except this toy is an insanely dangerous gauntlet that could probably kill anyone with one punch. Virgil has his own devil trigger too, and he can use it within fights, giving him all of the same buffs you get from your own. The final fight has you both facing off inside the demon world, and it's one of the best final fights in gaming history. I'm not exaggerating here. It's a fight where you truly feel like you're on equal footing, and because of that, it's a challenge, but not an unfair one. Wanna know something cool though? Remember when I talked about that one armored guy in the original Devil May Cry? Well, that guy was Virgil, but under the influence of Mundus. There's all kinds of lore reasons for this that I'm not gonna get into, but it's cool as shit. It's why Dante recognizes him in the first game once he loses his helmet, despite the fact Virgil wasn't even an established character yet. It also shows that Devil May Cry 3 is a prequel, acting as the first game technically, meaning you can just start with DMC free and not feel bad about it, which I do recommend doing. This isn't everything I have to say about Devil May Cry 3 by the way, I still got one more thing. In the special edition of the game, they made Virgil playable. You could play through the entire campaign of DMC free as Virgil, with his own unique moveset, weapons, and everything. It is just as awesome as it sounds. It's not perfect, you are just playing through the exact same missions as him with no difference that you'd expect to have a unique fight against Dante. Instead just has a doppelganger of Virgil in a red jacket. Despite this though, it's so much fun to play through as Virgil, and after this point it became a tradition to be able to play as him in future games. Except he gets more and more busted with each release, as you probably know from my video about him. I hope you all enjoyed this video on the first 3 Devil May Cry games. If you've never played them, I definitely recommend picking up the HD collection, or hell, even the original PS2 versions if you can get your hands on them, or if they've been sitting on a shelf for years and you completely forgot they were even there. If you want to see a follow-up video on the other DMC games, leave a like and let me know if that's something you want to see. Also, if you want to support what I do in the channel, I also have a Patreon linked down below. You get sneak peek previews of videos and you can even get your name put at the end of them. Anyway, I hope you all had a good time watching, and don't forget to stay motivated.